Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Tonight, we've some of the most disturbing true crime cases from around the world. Encounters that prove the real danger is always lurking somewhere. It's not hiding in the dark. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, let's step into true crime cases together. Shyla Hernandez Rivas. It was supposed to be just another school day in Reno, Nevada. Hallways buzzing with laughter, gossip echoing between lockers, the sound of sneakers against linoleum floors. But that normalcy was shattered the moment 14-year-old Shyla Hernandez Rivas picked up a knife and turned an ordinary argument into a nightmare that would stain the city's memory forever. Shyla wasn't the kind of girl people feared. She wasn't the type anyone would picture standing over a lifeless body. She was quiet, small for her age, with a calm face that made teachers describe her as polite or reserved. But underneath that stillness, something was brewing: anger, insecurity, a desperate need to not be seen as weak. The fight started over something stupid, maybe a few cruel words, maybe social media drama. Like most teenage battles, it didn't matter what the spark was. What mattered was that by the end of it, one classmate lay dying on the ground, and Shyla's hands were drenched in blood. Witnesses said it escalated fast. A shove, a slap. Then Shyla reached into her bag and pulled out the blade. In a single motion, she lunged forward, and the screaming began. Some kids froze, others ran. One teacher later said the look in Shyla's eyes didn't belong to a 14-year-old. The girl she stabbed gasped for air, clutching at her chest as blood soaked her shirt. Within minutes, the school courtyard was chaos. Sirens, crying, the metallic smell of blood mixing with asphalt and fear. Paramedics tried to save the victim, but it was too late. She died before reaching the hospital. Shyla stood still when police arrived. No tears, no panic, just silence. When asked why she did it, she whispered, "She pushed me too far." That one sentence became the center of every headline in Nevada. Pushed too far. What did that mean for a child who had just ended a life? Prosecutors painted her as a cold, calculated killer who brought a weapon to school knowing she'd use it. The defense argued she was just a scared kid caught in a moment of rage. In court, she looked so small sitting behind the defense table, just a child in an oversized orange jumpsuit, her legs barely reaching the floor. But when the jury watched the security footage, the courtroom went silent. They saw her pull the knife. They saw the precision of that motion. It didn't look like panic. It looked like intent. The victim's family sat frozen, tears streaming, as prosecutors replayed the footage again and again. Every stab felt like another wound reopening. One juror later admitted, "It wasn't the violence that got me. It was her face afterward. There was nothing there." Her attorneys begged for leniency, reminding the court of her age, her lack of prior history, her potential for rehabilitation. But the judge's voice was cold when the sentence was read. "You will serve 50 years in prison, eligible for parole after 20. Gasps filled the courtroom. Shyla didn't react. Not a single tear. In interviews afterward, detectives said something that chilled even seasoned officers. One of them recalled asking her if she regretted it. She paused, then said, "I just wanted it to stop." The public was divided. Some called her a monster. Others called her a victim of a broken system that teaches violence before it teaches empathy. But the truth sat somewhere darker, in that gray space where childhood and cruelty overlap. Behind bars, Shyla adjusted to prison life with unsettling ease. Guards noted her calm demeanor, her quiet obedience. But there were moments when she would stare at the wall for hours, lost somewhere in thought, mouthing the same phrase over and over again. "She pushed me too far." It's hard to say what that means anymore. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the sound of every insult, every humiliation echoing until something inside her snapped. Reno will never forget that day. The students who witnessed it still talk about the blood, the screaming, the way a normal afternoon turned into horror. And Shyla, barely a teenager, became a name carved into the city's collective guilt. When she turns 34, she'll be eligible for parole. If she walks free, she'll have spent more years behind bars than she ever lived outside of them. And maybe then, she'll realize what everyone else already knows. There are no winners in a story like hers. Only ghosts. Scarlett Jenkinson. It's February 2023 in Warrington, England. The kind of gray, misty afternoon where the air feels heavy, the world colorless. In Linear Park, a quiet trail stretches between trees and fields. It's where teenagers hang out after school, a place that should feel safe. But that day, 16-year-old Brianna Gay was lured there to die. Waiting for her in the cold were two people she thought she could trust, two classmates, 15-year-olds Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. They weren't angry. They weren't fighting. They were calm. And between them, hidden in a pocket, was a knife. What no one knew yet was that this wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was premeditated, rehearsed, written out in notebooks filled with fantasies of torture and death. Scarlett wasn't your typical teenager. Behind her quiet demeanor was an obsession. Serial killers, violence, pain. Her notebooks were littered with the names of Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez, John Wayne Gacy. She'd researched torture methods, watched dark web videos, and even claimed she'd found something called a red room. Teachers said she'd started bringing cannabis to school, drinking, acting out. Her classmates thought she was just edgy. No one realized she was planning murder. She called it her kill list. Brianna's name was on it. Scarlett had started spending more time with Eddie, another outcast, quiet, socially awkward, infatuated with Scarlett, and willing to do whatever she said. The two started texting constantly, swapping fantasies about killing people. Scarlett wrote about wanting to know what it felt like to stab someone. She planned it down to the minute, where it would happen, what weapon to use, what time to lure Brianna there, even the code word she'd use to tell Eddie when to attack. On February 11th, they met Brianna in the park. The ground was wet from rain. Trees swayed overhead. Scarlett talked casually, laughing. And then, when Brianna least expected it, Scarlett gave the signal. Eddie lunged first. Scarlett followed. Brianna tried to run, but the knife cut her down. 28 stab wounds. Head, neck, chest, back. When it was over, they just left. Walked away into the dusk, leaving Brianna bleeding on the ground. A couple walking their dog found her body later. The emergency services rushed in, but it was too late. The investigation was massive. Detectives immediately noticed something. Brianna's phone messages led right to Scarlett and Eddie, and when they searched Scarlett's room, they found the horror waiting there. Her journals read like a manifesto, pages describing methods of killing, discussions of kill counts, and fantasies about keeping trophies, teeth, eyes, body parts. There were doodles of knives, lists of victims. Chillingly, she wrote, "If we kill boy M, can I keep some things? A couple of teeth and an eye?" It didn't sound like a child experimenting with dark thoughts. It sounded like a predator in training. Police found that days before the stabbing, Scarlett had tried to poison Brianna by convincing her to overdose on pills. When that didn't work, she switched to her backup plan, the knife. During the trial, the prosecution said Scarlett was sadistic, controlling, and obsessed with violence. The judge called her the driving force of the murder. Eddie, though complicit, was under her influence. Both teens sat in silence as the court read their messages aloud, hundreds of them, where they talked about the excitement of killing, the anticipation, the rush. Scarlett showed no emotion. At one point, when a witness mentioned the number of stab wounds, she blinked, expressionless, as if it were just a number. When the verdict came, both were found guilty. The courtroom gasped when the judge revealed that their names, previously hidden because of their age, would now be released. The public had a right to know. Scarlett Jenkinson, Eddie Ratcliffe, two 15-year-olds who had become killers. Scarlett was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 22 years. Eddie got 20. The judge said the murder was planned, sadistic, and devoid of empathy. But what shocked the public most wasn't just the brutality. It was the motive, or rather, the absence of one. There was no revenge, no fight, no jealousy. Scarlett did it because she wanted to. She was fascinated by death. She wanted to feel what it was like to end a life. And she did. Brianna's mother described her daughter as bright, funny, and full of love. She said no punishment could ever match the pain of losing her child that way. Scarlett Jenkinson will spend most of her life behind bars. But even now, her story leaves a chill in the air, because she didn't kill out of hate or impulse. She killed out of curiosity. And that makes her one of the most disturbing teenagers Britain has ever seen. Group beating of Reggie Brown. It started with laughter. Just a group of teenage girls walking down a Washington, D.C. street on a warm night, their voices echoing between buildings. They were 12 to 15 years old, kids who should have been home scrolling through TikTok or gossiping on FaceTime. But what happened next turned their laughter into something horrifying. By sunrise, a 64-year-old man named Reggie Brown was dead. Reggie wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He was just a quiet man who lived alone, known in his neighborhood as polite, soft-spoken, the kind of guy who always held doors for strangers. On that night, fate put him in the wrong place at the worst possible time. The girls spotted him near a bus stop. One of them pulled out her phone and started recording. Another shouted something at Reggie, mocking, playful at first, then cruel. He ignored them, trying to walk away. That's when they surrounded him. At first, it looked like a prank, a stupid game for social media clout. But it escalated fast. One shoved him. Another threw a punch. The others joined in, kicking, laughing, screaming. Someone yelled, "Get him! Get him!" The sound of fists hitting flesh echoed through the street. Reggie fell, trying to cover his face, but they didn't stop. They hit him until he stopped moving. One girl even leaned down and kicked him again, just to be sure. When they finally ran off, their phones were still recording. And that footage would later haunt the entire city. Paramedics found Reggie barely breathing. He died in the hospital hours later. The cause of death? Blunt force trauma. Police traced the video through social media, and one by one, the girls were identified. The youngest was only 12 years old. The oldest was 15. None of them seemed to grasp the gravity of what they'd done. During interrogation, one laughed nervously and said, "We didn't mean to kill him." But intent didn't matter. The brutality spoke for itself. The community erupted in anger. Protests filled the streets. How could children do this? People asked. What kind of world are we living in? When the footage was shown in court, it felt like something out of a nightmare. The laughter, the cheering, the lifeless body. It was too much. Even seasoned detectives had to look away. Each girl was sentenced differently. Some to detention until they turned 21, others to juvenile rehabilitation programs. None were tried as adults, but their names will forever be linked to one of the most senseless acts of violence in DC's recent history. At sentencing, one girl cried uncontrollably, begging for forgiveness. Another stared blankly at the floor, and one, the youngest, asked the judge if she could go home after a few months. The judge's voice broke as he told her, "You took a man's life. You can't go home." Reggie's family sat in silence. His sister later said, "He survived everything in life, poverty, illness, hardship, but he couldn't survive them." There's something deeply disturbing about how easily the line between cruelty and entertainment vanished that night. How laughter became violence. How innocence turned into evil. By the time the girls realized what they'd done, it was too late. Their childhoods were gone. Reggie Brown was gone. And the world had one more reminder that darkness doesn't wait for adulthood. It starts young, festers quietly, then explodes without warning. Now, every year on that street corner, flowers appear under a streetlight. No one knows who leaves them. Some say it's his sister. Others think it's one of the girls, now older, trying to make peace with what she can never undo. Because you can't unsee what they did. You can't unhear the laughter. You can only wonder how kids so young learn to be so cruel. And maybe that's the scariest part. Evil doesn't always wear a monster's face. Sometimes it wears a school uniform. Gypsy Rose Blanchard. In the quiet town of Springfield, Missouri, there stood a pink house that looked like something out of a fairy tale. But behind those bright walls, behind the stuffed animals and charity donations and smiling photos, hid one of the darkest stories of abuse and manipulation America has ever seen. For years, people thought Gypsy Rose Blanchard was dying. They believed her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, a cheerful, doting woman who spoke softly and smiled often, was the embodiment of maternal sacrifice. She told doctors her daughter had leukemia, muscular dystrophy, seizures, asthma, a heart condition, every illness imaginable, and she had the medical files to prove it. Gypsy sat in a wheelchair, bald from forced head shavings, her teeth rotting from unnecessary medications, her life a constant cycle of surgeries, pills, and doctor visits. They got donations, free trips, even a Habitat for Humanity house built just for them. Neighbors adored them. Strangers online called them inspirational. But it was all a lie. Gypsy wasn't sick. She could walk. She could eat normal food. She didn't need a feeding tube. Her illnesses were invented by her mother, who suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder where a caregiver makes up or causes illness in someone to gain attention and sympathy. Dee Dee controlled every breath Gypsy took. She isolated her from the world, confiscated her devices, read her messages, lied to her doctors, and threatened her anytime she tried to speak up. "You don't know what's best for you," Dee Dee would whisper. "Mommy does." By her early 20s, Gypsy had lived a lifetime of torment. Then, online, she met Nicholas Godejohn, a man from Wisconsin with a dark fascination for violence and fantasy. They met on a Christian dating site. He was awkward, obsessive, but he listened. And for Gypsy, that was enough. Their conversations spiraled quickly, from innocent flirting to twisted fantasies. She told him about her mother's abuse. He promised to save her, but the plan they formed wasn't one of escape. It was one of blood. On June 14, 2015, Gypsy hid in the bathroom while Nicholas crept into Dee Dee's bedroom with a knife. He stabbed her 17 times as she slept. The sound of the fan masked the struggle. When it was over, Dee Dee's body lay lifeless, and the house that once symbolized hope now reeked of death and rot. Gypsy and Nicholas fled. They mailed the murder weapon to his home and boarded a bus to Wisconsin, believing they were free at last. But freedom didn't last long. Days later, police traced a bizarre Facebook post made from Dee Dee's account. "That bitch is dead." At first, friends thought it was a cruel hack. Then they found Dee Dee's body. When authorities located Gypsy, they expected to find a frail, wheelchair-bound girl on the brink of death. Instead, they found a healthy young woman standing on her own 2 feet. The truth unraveled, like a nightmare in reverse. In interrogation videos, Gypsy's voice trembles between relief and horror. "I wanted to be free," she said softly, "but not like this." The world was torn. Some saw Gypsy as a victim, a child who endured years of psychological torture and saw no other way out. Others saw her as a manipulator, a co-conspirator who plotted her mother's death in cold blood. During trial, prosecutors admitted one thing: this wasn't an ordinary murder. It was the result of systematic abuse so severe that Gypsy's perception of reality had been rewritten. Doctors testified that she'd been subjected to unnecessary surgeries, forced to use a feeding tube, and convinced she would die if she disobeyed. Her sentence shocked many: 10 years in prison for conspiracy to murder. Nicholas received life without parole. In prison, Gypsy found something she never had before: control. She learned who she was beyond her illnesses, beyond Dee Dee. For the first time, she could eat what she wanted, walk freely, and speak without fear. In 2023, she walked out of prison, smiling, free at last, but haunted forever. Today, she says she forgives her mother, but her voice cracks when she talks about the pink house, about the endless nights of being treated like a doll, about the blade that finally cut through her cage. Because Gypsy Rose didn't just kill her mother. She killed the illusion of perfect love, and she showed the world that sometimes the real monster wears a nurse's smile. Carly Madison Gregg. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening in Rankin County, Mississippi. The smell of dinner still hung in the air. The faint sound of television buzzed in the background, and nothing about that Tuesday suggested anything was about to go wrong. But inside one suburban home, a 14-year-old girl was about to rewrite what people thought evil looked like. Her name was Carly Madison Gregg. To her neighbors, she was a normal 8th grader. Shy, quiet, sometimes awkward. To her teachers, she was bright but moody, the kind of student you'd describe as going through a phase. But that phase would soon spiral into a blood-soaked headline that left the whole state asking one question. How could a child do something like this? Carly's relationship with her mother, 40-year-old Ashley Smiley, had been tense for months. Ashley was a teacher herself, strict but loving, determined to raise her daughter right. But Carly was rebelling hard. She'd been caught lying, sneaking out, vaping, and hanging around older kids. Her stepfather, Heath Smiley, tried to help, but the atmosphere at home was turning toxic. Every argument seemed to dig the family deeper into something ugly. In March 2024, that tension reached its breaking point. Ashley had been told that Carly was hiding something, possibly drugs or worse. That day, she decided she'd had enough. She stormed into Carly's room, searching through her things, confronting her over the lies. The argument that followed wasn't just a teenage outburst. It was a storm years in the making. Carly didn't yell. She didn't scream. She walked away, into her parents' bedroom. And that's where she found the gun. A .357 Magnum revolver, her stepfather's. Within minutes, the entire house would descend into horror. Ashley was in the kitchen when Carly came out holding the gun. She lifted it, aimed it, and fired 3 times. One bullet tore through Ashley's face, another through her chest. She fell instantly. The sound echoed across the neighborhood, but no one realized what they'd just heard. Then Carly walked to the door, calm as if she were walking to class. Her stepfather Heath was at work. She texted him, pretending everything was normal. "Hey," she wrote, "can you come home? Mom's acting weird." Heath arrived minutes later. The front door was cracked open. He stepped inside, calling for Ashley. That's when Carly pulled the trigger again. The bullet hit him, grazing his chest. He stumbled back, bleeding, confused. His own stepdaughter standing there, gun in hand, face blank, like she wasn't even present. Heath somehow managed to escape, dragging himself out the front door, calling 911. When police arrived, what they found inside didn't feel real. Ashley was dead. Carly was standing nearby, emotionless, her phone in her hand. But what she did next made the story go from tragic to absolutely chilling. Instead of running, Carly called a friend. She asked her to come over. When the friend arrived, Carly looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Are you squeamish around dead bodies?" Then she showed her mother's corpse. That friend later testified that Carly seemed proud, like she was showing off a secret she'd been waiting to share. Investigators later discovered that Carly had planned the killing hours before it happened. She had searched up methods to hide evidence, and even tampered with the house's security camera after shooting her mother. She knew exactly where to look. The camera's recording stopped seconds before the shots were fired. When police confronted her, she barely reacted. During the interrogation, she said, "I don't know why I did it." The trial that followed turned the quiet Mississippi teenager into one of the youngest killers in recent U.S. history. Prosecutors called it pure evil. They said Carly was cold, calculated, manipulative. But her defense painted another picture. A girl spiraling into mental illness, dealing with trauma, self-harm, and voices in her head. Courtroom footage showed Carly sitting motionless, sometimes crying softly when family members looked at her. The jury was shown surveillance clips, text messages, and the 911 call Heath made moments after being shot. His voice trembled as he begged for help, shouting that his stepdaughter had killed his wife. The friend Carly invited that night testified that she'd seen Ashley's body on the floor, and that Carly had smiled, The evidence was overwhelming. Even her defense couldn't deny she'd pulled the trigger. But they tried to argue it wasn't murder, that Carly had snapped, that she was delusional. A psychiatrist claimed she suffered from severe mood swings, auditory hallucinations, and emotional dysregulation. But prosecutors hit back hard. They reminded the jury of how Carly lured her stepfather home, how she tampered with evidence, and how she calmly described the crime afterward. That wasn't a psychotic break. That was intent. When the verdict came down, the courtroom was silent. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence. Carly's face crumpled, but she didn't speak. Her stepfather looked away, tears in his eyes. The judge's voice echoed through the chamber. Life in prison without parole. The maximum sentence. 14 years old. And she would die behind bars. Even as she was led away, the public struggled to process it. Was she a monster? Or a broken child who never got help in time? In interviews after the verdict, the district attorney said something that would go viral. Sometimes, evil comes in small packages. And that line haunted Mississippi, because it forced everyone to look at their own children and wonder, what kind of darkness could be hiding behind a teenage smile? Carly Madison Gregg wasn't born evil, but somewhere between the arguments, the secrets, and the silence, something inside her broke. And when it did, an entire family was destroyed. Alyssa Bustamante, October 21st, 2009, St. Martins, Missouri. A 9-year-old girl named Elizabeth Olton was walking home from a friend's house. It was only a few houses away. A short walk she'd done countless times. But that night, she never made it home. When Elizabeth's mother realized she was missing, panic set in immediately. She called neighbors, searched the woods, and then called 911. Within hours, police, dogs, and volunteers were combing the area. But there was no sign of the little girl. What no one knew then was that her body was already buried in a shallow grave, less than a mile away. And the person who put her there wasn't a stranger. It was a 15-year-old girl who lived down the street, Alyssa Bustamante. Alyssa wasn't the type you'd expect to do something like that. Or maybe she was. She had blue streaks in her hair, a dark wardrobe, and a fascination with death. Her classmates said she was quiet, strange, always sketching in notebooks. Teachers knew she'd tried to take her own life before and was on antidepressants. But under that teenage angst was something far more chilling, a curiosity about killing. Weeks before Elizabeth disappeared, Alyssa had dug 2 graves in the woods behind her house. Just dug them, for no reason anyone could explain. She told herself it was just a fantasy. But on that October evening, the fantasy became real. Elizabeth walked by, and Alyssa saw her, innocent, trusting, alone. She called out, pretending she needed help. The little girl followed her into the woods. That's when Alyssa attacked. She strangled Elizabeth until she passed out, then slit her throat and stabbed her in the chest. When it was over, she buried her body in one of those pre-dug graves, covered it with leaves, and walked home like nothing had happened. Later that night, she posted on her Facebook, "Hey guys, I'm going to church now. LOL." Police questioned Alyssa the next day. At first, she denied everything. But when they searched the woods, they found the graves. And when they searched her bedroom, they found her journal. In it, Alyssa had written, "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this, it's pretty enjoyable. Now I have to go to church. LOL." Those words chilled even veteran detectives. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment act. It was premeditated, deliberate, and disturbingly casual. During interrogation, Alyssa showed little emotion. She admitted to everything, the planning, the graves, the killing, but spoke about it as if describing a dream. When asked why she did it, she said she wanted to know what it felt like. Her trial drew national attention. People struggled to understand how a 15-year-old could be that detached, that empty. Her defense team argued she suffered from severe depression and had been neglected for years. left to spiral in her own darkness. But for Elizabeth's family, those explanations meant nothing. Their 9-year-old daughter was gone. For no reason other than someone else's curiosity, Alyssa eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In court, she apologized through tears, but the words felt hollow. Even the judge said he'd never seen such a disturbing lack of empathy in someone so young. Today, Alyssa sits in a Missouri women's prison. She's in her 30s now. By all accounts, she's quiet, well-behaved, even helpful. But those who remember her case can't forget the image of a 15-year-old girl laughing after writing that she'd killed someone and needed to go to church. And that's the part that still haunts people. Not just the act, but the emptiness behind it. A child who wanted to feel something and chose murder to do it. Elizabeth's grave is covered with pink flowers now, her favorite color. Just a few steps away, a reminder of how one moment of cruelty, born from boredom and darkness, can destroy countless lives. Isabella Guzman. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening in Aurora, Colorado. But by the time the sun set, the home of the Guzman family had turned into something out of a nightmare. What police would later find inside that small suburban house defied reason. A scene so brutal, it left even seasoned detectives shaken. On August 28, 2013, 18-year-old Isabella Guzman picked up a knife and stabbed her mother, Yunmi Hoy, 79 times. 79. The number alone sounds impossible, but the rage behind it was very real. Neighbors had heard arguments for months, screaming matches, slammed doors, the kind of tension that seeps through walls. Yunmi had raised Isabella mostly on her own, and as Isabella got older, something in her began to fracture. Friends described her as quiet, distant, sometimes cruel. Teachers remembered her as the kind of student who'd stare blankly at nothing, lost somewhere deep in her head. But inside that home, things were far worse than anyone imagined. In the days leading up to the murder, Isabella had become unpredictable, refusing to eat, shouting at her mother, making threats that sounded more like warnings. At one point, she told Yunmi, "You'll pay for what you've done." No one knew what she meant. That night, her stepfather, Ryan Hoy, came home to the sound of muffled screams coming from the upstairs bathroom. He rushed to the door, locked. From the other side, he heard his wife's voice, panicked, pleading, "Isabella, stop!" Then silence. When he forced the door open, he saw blood everywhere, on the walls, the mirror, the floor. And in the middle of it stood Isabella, knife still in hand, her face blank. She turned toward him slowly, expressionless, then walked past him without a word and disappeared. Police found her later that night, hiding under a stairwell at a nearby house. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead as if the world around her had stopped existing. At first, everyone thought it was pure evil, an ungrateful daughter who snapped. But when the trial began, the truth revealed something far darker. Doctors diagnosed Isabella with paranoid schizophrenia. She wasn't just angry. She was lost inside a mind that was no longer her own. She claimed voices told her that her mother was evil, that killing her was the only way to be free. In court, her eyes were distant, her face cold. When reporters captured her smirking, those images went viral. People called her the demon girl, the smiling killer. But behind that eerie calm was chaos, a mind fractured by delusion, convinced of a war only she could see. Psychiatrists testified that Isabella had shown signs of severe mental illness long before the murder. Paranoia, hallucinations, emotional detachment. But her family never realized how far it had gone. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent. Not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to the Colorado Mental Health Institute in Pueblo, where she remains to this day. There, she began to receive treatment for the first time in her life. Years later, in a rare interview, Isabella looked almost unrecognizable, calm, clear-eyed, reflective. She said she understood now what she had done, that she was sick then, and that she wished she could take it back. But can remorse ever erase 79 stab wounds? The question still lingers in the minds of everyone who's heard her story. Because Isabella Guzman isn't the image of a monster. She's something more unsettling. Proof that the human mind, when broken, can create monsters from within. And somewhere in Aurora, people still remember that quiet suburban night when a daughter turned on her mother. Not out of hatred, but madness. Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf Star City, West Virginia. A quiet town, almost too ordinary. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Where teenage friendships are the center of life. But on a warm July night in 2012, three best friends drove out together into the darkness. And only two came back. Their names were Sheila Eddy, Rachel Schoaf, and Skylar Neese. To anyone looking in, they were inseparable. The kind of girls who posted selfies together, giggled over inside jokes, and tweeted lyrics about friendship. But beneath the surface, something toxic was growing. Jealousy, resentment, and a cruel secret that would end in blood. Skylar was the outlier, smart, sarcastic, quick-witted. She and Sheila had been best friends for years, but when Rachel joined the picture, the dynamic shifted. Two became three, and tensions started to build. Skylar began to feel left out, and her tweets hinted at betrayal, sick of being taken for granted. You do things thinking people won't find out. Then, on July 5th, 2012, just after midnight, Skylar climbed out her bedroom window. Surveillance cameras caught her getting into a car with Sheila and Rachel. It was supposed to be another late-night adventure. It turned out to be her last. The girls drove across the state line into rural Pennsylvania, a secluded area surrounded by woods. When Skylar stepped out of the car, she laughed, thinking it was just another hangout spot. She never noticed the knives. They told her to count to 3. Then, together, they lunged. Skylar fought back, but 2 against 1 was no contest. The sound of metal tearing through flesh echoed through the trees. She screamed, begged them to stop, but they didn't stop until she was silent. Her last words were barely a whisper. "Why?" And Rachel answered coldly, "Because we didn't like you anymore." They dragged her body deeper into the woods, covered it with branches and rocks, then drove home like nothing had happened. They tweeted about movies, posted photos, laughed with friends, and for months they lived with that secret, confident no one would ever know. But guilt doesn't stay buried. Rachel cracked first. 6 months later, shaking and sobbing, she walked into a police station and confessed everything. "We stabbed her," she told detectives. "We killed Skylar." Investigators didn't believe her, until she led them to the body. When Sheila was confronted, she played dumb, tweeting things like, "Always keep your cool, and you'll regret losing me." Even after Skylar's body was identified, she kept pretending to care, posting about her missing best friend. But by then, everyone saw through her. At trial, the details were sickening. The way they planned it for months, brought knives and cleaning supplies, and picked the spot where they'd bury her. Cold, deliberate, emotionless. Rachel took a plea deal, admitting to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 30 years, eligible for parole after 10. Sheila went to trial and got life, with the possibility of parole after 15. In prison, they went from being the girls next door to the girls who killed their best friend. Skylar's parents turned their grief into action, fighting to change the law so that missing teenagers could be classified as endangered immediately. It's called Skylar's Law now, a name carved into legislation because 2 girls decided friendship wasn't convenient anymore. Looking back, it's chilling how normal they looked. Selfies, birthday photos, smiling faces. They looked like every other teenage trio. And maybe that's why the story still haunts people, because it didn't come from monsters hiding in the dark. It came from 2 girls who used to call her their sister. The woods where Skylar died are quiet now, but every now and then, hikers swear they feel something there, a presence that doesn't fade. Maybe it's just the wind. Or maybe it's a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears lip gloss and a smile. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Wire. It was a warm Saturday morning in Waukesha, Wisconsin, a quiet suburb where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Three 12-year-old girls, best friends, were celebrating a birthday. They laughed, ate pizza, played dress-up, talked about boys, about sleepovers. Just kids being kids. But beneath the laughter lurked something far darker. Because two of those girls, Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, had been planning something unthinkable for months. Their obsession started online, in the corners of the internet where fiction blurs with fear. They became fixated on Slender Man, a tall, faceless creature born from creepypasta forums. In their minds, he wasn't a story. He was real, and he was watching. They believed that if they killed someone innocent, Slender Man would appear. He'd take them to his mansion in the woods, and they'd live with him forever. And they knew exactly who their sacrifice would be. Their friend, Peyton Leutner. The morning of May 31st, 2014, they lured Peyton into the woods near a park. The plan was chillingly precise. They told her they wanted to play hide and seek. Then, when the time was right, Morgan pulled out a knife. 19 stab wounds. Peyton screamed, begged, crawled, but they left her there, bleeding among the trees. Her last words to them were soft, confused. "I trusted you." Morgan told her to lie down and be quiet. Then they ran. But Peyton didn't die. Despite the brutal attack, she dragged herself to a nearby bike path, where a passing cyclist found her, pale and soaked in blood. She survived, by inches. Meanwhile, police found Morgan and Anissa walking along a highway, their clothes stained, their voices eerily calm. When asked what they were doing, they said they were going to find Slender Man. In the interrogation footage, both girls spoke with a detached, dreamlike tone. Anissa explained how they'd been communicating with Slender Man online. Morgan, her voice flat, said, "He watches me. He told me to do it." Investigators soon realized this wasn't a normal crime. It was a psychotic break, shared delusion amplified by fear and imagination. Experts later said Morgan suffered from early-onset schizophrenia. She saw things, heard voices. Anissa believed her completely. The courtroom felt like another world. Two children sitting there, blank-faced, charged with attempted murder. Peyton, their victim, bravely testified years later, saying, "I don't think they're evil. I think they lost themselves." Both girls were found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Instead of prison, they were sent to psychiatric institutions. Morgan for up to 40 years, Anissa for up to 25. Years passed. Anissa was released in 2021 under supervision, quietly trying to rebuild her life. Morgan remains confined, still under psychiatric care. The public never forgot the photos. 3 smiling girls at a sleepover. Before, everything changed. The story became legend, the kind of urban horror that parents whispered about. But underneath the myth, it was about something far more terrifying, the power of belief. Because belief can drive a child to imagine monsters, but it can also drive them to become one. The Slender Man case wasn't just about 2 girls who stabbed their friend. It was about the fragility of young minds in a digital age, where fiction bleeds into reality, and reality bleeds into blood. And in the stillness of that Wisconsin forest, you can still feel it, the echo of footsteps, the whisper of wind through trees, and the reminder that monsters don't always come from the stories we read online. Sometimes, they come from the stories we tell ourselves. Amber Wright and Kyle Hooper. It started as a teenage breakup. Texts, rumors, jealousy. The kind of drama that usually fades after a few weeks. But in the small town of Summerfield, Florida, in April 2011, that drama would spiral into one of the most gruesome teen murders the state had ever seen. 15-year-old Amber Wright and 16-year-old Kyle Hooper weren't strangers to Seth Jackson. In fact, Seth was Amber's ex-boyfriend. They'd dated for a while. A young, passionate relationship that burned too hot, too fast. But when it ended, it didn't just break hearts. It unleashed something darker. Seth was popular, confident, the kind of kid people noticed. Amber was the opposite. Emotional, reactive, desperate to be seen. Their breakup turned toxic. They started posting insults online, sharing screenshots, dragging each other publicly. It became a digital war. Facebook statuses, angry texts, petty revenge. But behind those posts, Amber wasn't just angry. She was plotting. On April 17th, 2011, Amber sent Seeth a message that would change everything. She said she wanted to talk, to clear things up, maybe even get back together. Her words were soft, apologetic, and Seeth believed her. He had no idea that waiting for him at that house were people who wanted him dead. When Seeth arrived, the lights were dim. He thought he was just meeting Amber. But as soon as he stepped inside, the trap closed. Her brother, Kyle Hooper, was there, along with their friends Charlie Ely, Justin Soto, and Michael Bargo, a 19-year-old with a violent streak and a gun. They surrounded Seeth. The argument started small, shouting, accusations, betrayal. Then it escalated fast. A glass bottle shattered across Seeth's face. Fists flew. He tried to fight back, but it was 5 against 1. The beating was brutal. Then came the gun. Michael Bargo raised it and fired. The first shot hit Seeth in the neck. He screamed, stumbling, begging them to stop. They didn't. Another shot, and another. When it was over, the air was thick with blood and smoke. Seeth was still alive. Barely. But Bargo wasn't done. They dragged him into the bathroom, shoved him into a bathtub, and shot him again. The group stood there in silence for a moment, staring at what they'd done. Then they started cleaning. They stuffed Seeth's body into a sleeping bag, carried it outside, and burned it in a backyard fire pit. When morning came, they scooped the ashes into paint buckets and dumped them into a nearby quarry. A teenage boy, reduced to dust, because of a breakup. But the secret didn't last long. The next day, Kyle Hooper broke down and told his mother everything. Police rushed to the scene and found blood, bullet casings, and bone fragments in the fire pit. It was over. Amber, Kyle, and the others were arrested. None of them looked like killers. They looked like kids caught in something they couldn't undo. But the evidence was overwhelming. Texts, witness testimony, and Amber's own messages luring Seeth to his death. In court, prosecutors described the murder as a calculated act of revenge. Amber cried as they read her messages out loud. Kyle looked numb, but the courtroom's pity didn't last. When the photos were shown, what was left of Seeth, the entire room went silent. Amber and Kyle were both sentenced to life in prison without parole, though later sentenced to life with parole after 25 years due to their age. Michael Bargo, the shooter, received the death penalty. Amber once said in an interview that she didn't think it would go that far, that she thought they were just going to teach him a lesson. But that's what makes it haunting. None of them thought. They acted out of hate, jealousy, and the kind of immaturity that doesn't understand the finality of death. Seeth's father still visits the quarry sometimes. He says it's the only place he can feel close to his son, a place where love and rage, youth and evil, collided under the Florida sun, and ended with nothing but ashes. Lorraine Thorpe. She was just 15 years old when the streets of Ipswich, Suffolk, became the stage for one of the most disturbing murder cases in modern British history. She wasn't the girl next door or the quiet outcast. She was something else entirely. Raised in chaos, surrounded by violence and neglect, Lorraine grew up not learning love or empathy, but cruelty. And by the time she hit her teenage years, she wasn't just surviving that world. She was part of it. Her childhood was a slow-motion tragedy. Her father, Desmond Thorpe, was a frail man, disabled and often drunk, and her mother was gone. Home was a run-down flat filled with cigarette smoke, empty bottles, and shouting. Lorraine had no stability, no kindness, no boundaries. Social services knew her name. They'd been in and out of her life for years, but no intervention ever really helped. By 14, Lorraine was hanging around with adults twice her age, alcoholics, drug users, people who lived on the fringes of society. One of them was a man named Paul Clark. He was in his 40s, volatile, violent, and controlling. But to Lorraine, he felt like power, a twisted father figure who made her feel noticed. People in the community said she followed him everywhere, like a shadow. Together, they became something dark, a pair bound by sadism and fear. In August 2009, their darkness finally exploded. The first victim was Rosalind Hunt, a 41-year-old woman who'd once been part of the same social circle. Rosalind was kind but vulnerable, the kind of woman who tried to help everyone, even when it cost her. But one night, she made the mistake of crossing Paul Clark. Rumors say she had spoken badly about him, maybe told others about his abuse. Whatever it was, Paul wanted revenge, and Lorraine, 15, eager to please him, wanted to help. What followed was hours of torture. Inside Clark's filthy flat, Rosalind was beaten, kicked, and humiliated. Clark was the ringleader, but Lorraine joined in, laughing, shouting, hitting. Witnesses later told police they heard screams through the walls, sounds that went on deep into the night. By the time it was over, Rosalind's face was unrecognizable. Her ribs were broken. She was left to die alone, her body found the next day in a pool of blood. When police began asking questions, the story didn't make sense. Lorraine was just a child. How could she have been involved in something so violent? But the evidence was there. Blood, DNA, witnesses. Still, before officers could even finish unraveling the first murder, Lorraine and Clark struck again. This time, the victim was her own father. Desmond Thorpe had become a liability. He knew what Lorraine and Clark had done. He'd been talking, telling others that they were involved in Rosalind's murder. Maybe he thought he could protect his daughter by exposing Clark. But to Lorraine, that meant only one thing: betrayal. Days after Rosalind's death, Lorraine and Clark confronted Desmond. What happened next is almost too disturbing to imagine. They attacked him inside his small flat. Clark punched and kicked him until he fell to the floor. But it was Lorraine, his own daughter, who finished the job. She beat him with her bare hands, strangled him, and left him gasping for air. When it was over, she stood over his body in silence, watching the life leave the man who'd raised her. Forensic investigators would later say the brutality of that second killing shocked even seasoned detectives. It wasn't quick, it was personal. When police arrested Lorraine days later, she didn't cry or panic. She smirked. Officers described her as cold, detached, a child with no grasp of the horror around her. During questioning, she shrugged off the details of the murders, insisting Clark had made her do it. And in some ways, that was true. Clark had manipulated her, controlled her, filled her young mind with violence. But the facts didn't lie. Lorraine wasn't a bystander. She was an active participant. At trial, prosecutors painted a picture of a girl who had grown up surrounded by neglect and cruelty until she became part of it. They showed photos of Rosalind's injuries, so severe that some jurors looked away. They described Desmond's final moments, his own daughter standing over him, emotionless. The defense tried to argue that Lorraine was a victim herself, a child groomed and abused by an older man. They described how Clark had brainwashed her, how she was desperate for approval and too young to resist his influence. And though the jury agreed that she'd been manipulated, it didn't erase what she'd done. When the verdict was read, Lorraine barely reacted. She was found guilty of both murders, the youngest female double murderer in Britain's history. Paul Clark was convicted alongside her. Lorraine was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 14 years before she could even apply for parole. Clark received a life term as well. It was the kind of small Texas town where people still left their doors unlocked, where Friday nights meant church dinners or high school football, and where everyone believed that evil had a face, and it didn't live next door. But on the night of March 1st, 2008, innocence was wiped off the map of Emory, Texas. The Caffey family's modest white house, at the end of a quiet dirt road, became the site of one of the most shocking crimes in American history. A crime that no one could comprehend, because it was orchestrated not by a stranger, not by a seasoned killer, but by the family's 16-year-old daughter, Erin. Erin Caffey wasn't the type of girl you'd ever suspect of murder. She sang in her church choir. She played the flute. She had blonde hair that framed a soft, innocent face, the kind that teachers described as sweet, quiet, a good student. Her parents, Terry and Penny, raised her and her two younger brothers, Matthew and Tyler, in a home built on faith, discipline, and routine. They weren't wealthy, but they were close-knit. At least, that's what everyone thought. But behind that picture-perfect family portrait, something was rotting. Something that would soon explode into unimaginable violence. When Erin turned 16, she fell for a boy named Charlie Wilkinson, a 19-year-old who worked odd jobs and drove an old pickup truck. He wasn't dangerous, not at first. In a small town like Emory, dating an older boy felt thrilling, rebellious. Charlie showered Erin with attention, calling her Angel, promising her forever. But Terry and Penny saw something else. A bad influence. They didn't like his attitude, the late-night calls, the sneaking around. And when they discovered that Charlie was sleeping with their daughter, everything changed. They forbade Erin from seeing him again. They took her phone, grounded her, and told her she'd lose everything if she didn't obey. To Erin, it wasn't just a punishment. It was war. From that moment on, something inside her twisted. What started as teenage heartbreak curdled into rage, a poisonous, obsessive anger that fed on itself. Erin couldn't imagine life without Charlie, and instead of waiting out the storm, she started whispering the unthinkable. In her mind, her parents weren't protecting her. They were the enemy, and she wanted them gone. The conversations began innocently, in the way all horror stories do. Erin told Charlie that her parents were ruining her life, that they were cruel, that they didn't deserve her love. Charlie, infatuated and easily manipulated, believed every word. Soon, Erin's bitterness grew into a dark fantasy. What if her parents weren't around anymore? What if they were dead? Charlie wasn't alone for long. He brought in his friend Charles Wade, a heavier, quieter boy with a mean streak, and Wade's girlfriend, Bobby Johnson, who was just 16 herself. Together, this strange group of teenagers formed a deadly plan. They weren't hardened criminals. They weren't masterminds. They were kids who had convinced themselves that murder was the solution to teenage heartbreak. And the worst part? Erin wasn't just a bystander. She was the architect. The night of March the 1st was cold, windless, and silent. The kind of night where sound travels farther than usual. Around 2 a.m., while her family slept, Erin waited in her room, pretending to be asleep. Outside, Charlie's car headlights flickered in the darkness as he parked down the road. He carried a .22 caliber rifle, a knife, and the kind of adrenaline that only comes before doing something irreversible. Erin texted him one last time before setting her phone aside. She told him the door would be unlocked. Then she went to her window, peeking through the blinds, watching him approach. Charlie and Charles entered the house quietly. The floorboards creaked under their shoes. The air smelled faintly of the wood smoke from the fireplace. They moved down the hallway, first to the master bedroom. Terry and Penny were sound asleep. What happened next was chaos. A shot rang out, then another. Penny awoke in confusion, but before she could scream, Charlie was over her with the knife. He stabbed her again and again, 12 times in total, each wound more brutal than the last. Terry woke up, disoriented, bleeding, and watched his wife die beside him. He was shot multiple times himself, but somehow, by pure will or miracle, he stayed alive. While the men slaughtered his parents, Erin's brothers, 13-year-old Matthew and 8-year-old Tyler, woke up to the sound of screams. They didn't understand what was happening, only that something was terribly wrong. The killers moved to their rooms. The boys begged, cried, screamed for help. But mercy wasn't part of the plan. Charlie and Charles shot and stabbed them, then set the house on fire. They wanted no survivors. As flames began to swallow the walls, the killers ran. Erin was waiting in the car, parked a short distance away. When they picked her up, she wasn't crying. She wasn't hysterical. Witnesses later said she looked calm, almost relieved. She told them she could see the smoke from her house rising in the distance and said softly, "It's done." But the story didn't end there, because Terry Caffey, somehow, wasn't dead. Bleeding from 5 bullet wounds, he crawled, barefoot and half-conscious, over 300 yards through the woods, dragging himself toward a neighbor's house. It took him hours, every breath a battle, but he refused to die. When he finally reached help, he whispered one thing: my house, my family. When first responders reached the scene, the Caffey home was nothing but ash. Inside, they found the bodies of Penny, Matthew, and Tyler, burned beyond recognition. But Terry's survival changed everything. He was the one who told police exactly who had done it. He recognized Charlie's face in the flash of the rifle. He knew the voice he heard whispering Erin's name. And when investigators questioned Erin the next morning, she tried to act confused. But she couldn't lie for long. When the truth came out, even hardened detectives were stunned. The murder plot had been Erin's idea from the start. Text messages between her and Charlie were cold and calculated. "I love you enough to kill for you," Charlie had written. "Then do it," Erin replied. They planned it down to the minute. Erin made sure the door was unlocked, that her brother's room would be last, that no one would escape. During her interrogation, Erin shifted between denial and detachment. She said she didn't mean for her brothers to die, that she only wanted her parents gone so she could be with Charlie. But every new piece of evidence made it clear. She wasn't just an accomplice. She was the reason 3 people were dead. When the trial began, the town of Emory filled with whispers. People couldn't reconcile the image of the smiling, church-going girl with the monster described in court. The prosecution painted her as manipulative, the true killer in spirit, if not in action. The defense argued that she was a victim of grooming, that Charlie had brainwashed her. But the text messages told the real story. Erin was no puppet. She was the one pulling the strings. Terry Caffey, the man who had lost everything, stunned everyone when he took the stand. He told the jury that he had forgiven his daughter. He said hate would only destroy what little was left of him. He said he prayed for her every day. His forgiveness didn't change the outcome, but it changed the way the world saw the case. Was Erin a monster, or just a broken child poisoned by obsession? In 2009, Erin was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison, with a chance of parole when she's 59. Charlie and Charles received similar sentences. Bobby Johnson, who waited in the car, was sentenced to 40 years. The judge said their crimes were a grotesque betrayal of humanity, and the courtroom sat in silence. Erin never cried. She didn't plead. She didn't apologize. Years later, Terry would visit her in prison. He said he still saw the same little girl who used to sit on his lap and sing hymns. But when she talked about that night, her words chilled him. She said, "Dad, I don't even recognize that person anymore. I don't know who she was." Maybe that was true. Maybe the Erin who orchestrated the murder of her own family was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood the cost of her decisions. But for the world watching, that distinction didn't matter. Because in the end, the story of Erin Caffey isn't just about murder. It's about how love, twisted, obsessive, desperate, can turn into something darker than hate. It's about how the line between teenage heartbreak and pure evil can disappear in an instant. And it's about a father who survived the impossible, only to live with the question that will haunt him forever. What makes a daughter kill her family for love? No one in Emory leaves their doors unlocked anymore. The Caffey home is gone, erased by fire and grief. But the echoes of that night, the screams, the gunshots, the sound of a father crawling through the woods, still hang in the air like smoke. Erin sits in a Texas prison, counting years instead of days, the ghost of her mother and brothers always beside her. And somewhere deep down, in the quiet of her cell, she must wonder the same thing that everyone else does. If she could go back to that night, to that text, to that moment when everything could have been stopped, would she still unlock the door?